Hey there, this is Delegate Mark Levine. Welcome anyone who's actually watching this on my Facebook page. I just come back from a panel sponsored by Virginia One Virginia 2021. This is the group that is heavily behind the constitutional amendment that they claim will reduce gerrymandering. I claim will increase gerrymandering in Virginia. And it was a one-sided event, as I expected it to be. And to be fair, I did tell them that I wanted to come. They wouldn't put me on a panel, obviously, but just come and witness what they did and let them know that I was a critic, so that if they didn't want me there, I wouldn't have shown up. And they said I could come, which I appreciated. But it was frustrating. It kind of reminded me of when I appear on Fox News, right? You go into a place where everyone disagrees with you and they say a whole bunch of things that you disagree with. And of course, I didn't have the opportunity at all to respond. They did let me kind of ask a question. They didn't let me ask it. They sort of stated my position. But what I wanted to do, frankly, and just because it's eating me up inside because I just got home, is I took notes of all their arguments. And I want to tell you what their arguments are and how I'd respond to them, because I didn't have that opportunity during the forum. And of course, I will have that opportunity, this Wednesday at Phelan Hall and Marymount University on Glebe Road. The information is on my website, markfordelegate.com. I will be debating Brian Cannon, the head of Virginia 121, and we will have a fair debate rather than a one-sided one. So I'm looking forward to that. And that's going to be at 8 p.m., 7 p.m. if you want dinner. Again, all the details are on my website. But what I thought I'd do is just go through my notes and kind of say what their arguments were and what I would have said if I'd had the chance to. And they're in no particular order because I just kind of scrambled everything on these notes as I could. But it's very interesting to hear their arguments. So let's go through them here. The professor, I think he was a professor, not quite sure. He was most interesting. One of the things he pointed out was that there's a lot of norm violation. Well, that's true. He was using it in the context of saying that because everyone's violating norms, you can't trust politicians, in redistricting, which I get. That's why I've proposed to let a computer do it rather than let the Virginia Supreme Court do it. But to me, this idea of this norm violation, that no one's following the rules, that to me supported my argument, because my point is that I don't trust the Republican conservative Virginia Supreme Court to draw the lines fairly. And he even pointed out that the 5 members of the United States Supreme Court had said, go forth and gerrymander. He's right about that. The Supreme Court said, they said that racial gerrymandering was bad, political gerrymandering was good. To be fair, they have to rule that way on racial gerrymandering because the Voting Rights Act is a law. The political gerrymandering was under the U.S. Constitution. But the heart of it is he admitted that the 5 conservatives rendered a really bad decision when they said, go forth and gerrymander all you want. So, but then he didn't seem to think that the Virginia Supreme Court would act badly. So suddenly Ken Cuccinelli's right-hand man, we can trust, but we can't trust Trump's right-hand man? Didn't make sense to me. He then goes on, what else did they say? He said that the professor said the Supreme Court could work. Nice, it could work. Well, I guess it could work, sure. And maybe Kavanaugh and Gorsuch will allow blacks to vote. It's possible. But then he said that the commission, what they would do would be mutually agreeable. Well, that's not true. We've already discussed the fact that in D3 of the amendment, all it takes is 2 Republicans or 2 Democrats, any 2 legislators in the same body, Kurt Cox and Todd Gilbert are my 2 examples, can just say, nope, the deal dies, the commission dies, it goes to the Supreme Court. So that's not true. And then they say, if we get it wrong, we'll just fix it in 10 years, right? Many people made this argument. Okay, the Constitutional Amendment's not perfect. They said, I actually think it's dangerous. They said it's not perfect, but if we get it wrong, we'll just do it again in 2031. Now here they've just made this big argument on how gerrymandering prevents a majority population from controlling the legislature. Correct arguments that gerrymandering allows a minority to control a legislature. And they're saying, well, if we get it wrong and the Supreme Court chooses the districts and they elect Republicans, we'll just fix it in 2031. Well, how are we going to fix it? The only way to amend the Constitution of Virginia is for 2 successive legislatures to pass the same constitutional amendment. And if the lines are gerrymandered strongly in favor of Republicans, as I fear the Supreme Court will do, we will never fix it. Not in 31, not in 41, not in 51, never. Because remember, well, the other thing they said was that, you know, these things always go to the state Supreme Court. Look at Michigan, look at California. And they're right. In other states where they have independent commissions, oftentimes it goes to the state Supreme Court. So what's the problem with Virginia Supreme Court? Because in California and in Michigan and in 48 states of the United States, the people get to choose the Supreme Court. Either they elect them directly, or they elect the governor who chooses them, or they elect the governor who indirectly chooses them. But in any case, if a Supreme Court goes wild, the people can correct that. But in Virginia and South Carolina were the only 2 states where the legislature chooses the Supreme Court. So exactly my fear, right? The Supreme Court chooses the legislature, which then chooses the Supreme Court, which chooses the legislature, which chooses the Supreme Court. We can't undo this in 31, 41, 51, 61, or 71 because the Supreme Court has an incentive to choose a conservative legislature so they can be reappointed to 12-year terms. And conversely, the legislature has an incentive to choose a conservative Supreme Court so that they can be gerrymandered in their favor forever. Did not address that argument, obviously. They did say they could fix it in 10 years. They also said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You're going to hear that argument a lot. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. That is an argument that I often make. For example, minimum wage. I support a $15 minimum wage. But would I vote against a $13 minimum wage if that was the only option on the table? No, I would say 13 is better than the current system. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Don't let the fact that I want 15 prevent me from voting for 13 because it's still better. That's true normally. It's not true here. Remember, my fear is not that this proposal is imperfect. My fear is that this proposal is worse than current law. Is worse than current law because it allows people appointed by the illegally gerrymandered Republican majority to choose the districts. And that's worse than current law. I mean, people would say, well, it's unfair to let the Democrats choose the districts the way the Republicans did in 2011 and in 2001. I agree. Democrats may very well push it on our end. That's true. But this proposal lets Republicans do it. Neither one is fair. My proposal, the proposal that lets computers do it based on proportional representation, is mathematically fair. And you can prove it. You can do the math. You can prove that the districts, right, all you do is look at the gubernatorial election of 2017. Ralph Northam won 55% of the vote. So on average, 55% of the districts should be Democratic. If we get 60 or 65, we've over-gerrymandered. If we get 45 or 50, the Republicans have over-gerrymandered. And you can check this out mathematically. That's the thing. So if we let computers draw the lines, and we can have 55-45 representation. Now, it wouldn't be perfect. We would probably have, like I said, maybe 40 solid Dem districts, 30 solid Republican districts. It's not like we're going to have crazy districts that wind from Southwest Virginia to Alexandria. But on average, when you split the competitive districts equally, we should end up at 55-45, which is what Virginia's polity is. Never forget, and they really got this wrong at One Virginia 2021, the reason why gerrymandering is wrong is not because districts are squiggly. That's not the reason they're wrong. They look funky. No. What we're having aesthetic. We want paintings to be square. That's not why they're wrong. Gerrymandering is wrong because it's unrepresentative, because a minority can control a majority, because the lines don't represent the people. That's what makes it wrong, not that the lines are squiggly. So they talked all the time about they wanted fair maps. Fair maps. We want fair maps. Well, I want fair maps. I want proportional representation. That's fair. I want maps that reflect Virginia, the people of Virginia. That's what I want. That's not what they want. That's not how they define fair maps. They don't define fair maps as representative, democratic maps. No. They define maps as communities of interest. One woman complained there are 3 senators in Arlington, and that's really, really bad. There should just be 1 senator in Arlington. And I kind of wanted to show her a map of Virginia, much like you may have seen in my primer on gerrymandering, right? There's a little blue corner of Northern Virginia, very heavy in population, very small geographically. There's a blue island around Richmond. There's one around Hampton Roads, and then a couple tiny islands, Charlottesville, Roanoke. That's it. We are the majority in Virginia, we Democrats, but Republicans control the rural areas. That's true all across the country. Now, I'm going to have a gathering where we're going to play a gerrymandering game. I want to invite everyone to it. It'll be on my website. It's going to be December 20th at David and Greg's house. And we're going to play a gerrymandering game. And you're going to learn how to gerrymander. And the way you gerrymander is cracking and packing. And what's cracking and packing? You pack all your opponents into one really tight district where it's 98% your opponents and 2% you. And then your districts are all 60% your advantage. And by doing that, you can have much more power. And it'll be easier to see when we play with the maps, although I've given you an example if you look at my primer on gerrymandering. By the way, if you didn't read that, it's on my website, markfordelegate.com, and it gives you an example of how you pack and crack. You pack your opponents together and you crack their cities. Like, for example, Fredericksburg, split in half so that it would be split up this little Democratic blue island in a red sea. Here's the point. Naturally, it is easier to gerrymander in favor of Republicans than Democrats. That's the way the map works. Because we have cities that are 80, 85% Democratic, and we have countryside that's 65% Republican. And because of that, if you were just to draw the lines around county and city lines, what would happen is the Democrats would be more tightly packed than the Republicans. And in terms of wasted votes, the unhappy people, you'd have many more unhappy Democrats than happy Republicans. And that's not fair. It is not fair when 45% of Virginia can control more than 50% of the seats. That's what's unfair. What's not unfair is, okay, the district swing, wends its way a little bit. Now, I don't love squiggly lines. I support communities of interest as much as anyone. If we can do it with a fair politics, I'm all about combining communities of interest. But if we can't be fair, it is better that we be fair. It's important to understand how we are fair. Now, they go on and complained that they basically want random districts. They want the, rectangular districts. Well, random, as I pointed out, favors Republicans because Democrats live close to each other in cities. That's just a fact. They don't like the crazy maps. Rather than not liking unrepresentative legislators, they don't like the crazy maps. And then there was talk about unresponsive legislators. If you gerrymander, your legislators, they're not going to talk to you. They don't fear re-election. They can't be found. And you know what I thought? I thought if your legislator can't be found, get a new legislator. Get a new delegate or a senator. And if you're in a solid blue district and you can't talk to your legislator, they don't come here on Facebook late in the night when they should be eating dinner and talk to you, throw them out. Primary them out. You have a right to do that. Every legislator should be accountable. And if they're not accountable and it's a competitive district, you can vote the other party. If it's a non-competitive district, you can vote in the same party. But if you're complaining that your delegate or your senator isn't representative, you have the wrong delegate or senator. I'm all about throwing the bums out, but that's individual. I represent Alexandria, Arlington, and Fairfax. And even though 75% of my district is Alexandria and only about 17% is Arlington, I'm in Arlington all the time. And my 8% Fairfax, I am in Fairfax more than 8% of the time. I try to represent every part of all three of my jurisdictions. And again, if someone doesn't do that, throw them out. The other thing that they talked about were how the citizens on the commission were going to save the day. It was going to be a fair commission because citizens were there. They didn't mention that the citizens are chosen by the legislators. So the fact that the legislator chooses his best friend somehow makes that a citizen and somehow makes it fair. See, the thing about the amendment is it has a lot of what I call totems of democracy. A totem of democracy. That's something that looks like it's democracy, but it really isn't, right? If the king can choose his best friend to decide the king's district, or a politician, right? That looks fair, but it really isn't, right? If Donald Trump gets Corey Lewandowski to draw the districts, would he be equal and fair? I don't think so. The legislators choose the citizens. And they pointed out that they're going to have to go to at least 3 places in Virginia. Great. I like to visit Virginia. I mean, it's better than nothing. I'm glad they're visiting Roanoke and Hampton Roads. But the mere fact that the commission goes to 3 places, it's a totem of democracy. It looks like they're being fair. It has indicia of presumed fairness. But I guarantee you, wherever Justice Scalia visited, he would always have been unfair. And by the way, for those who love the going to 3 different places and love the fact that the bill has a lot of transparency in it, that's good. I'm putting in 2 bills this year, 2 completely different bills as alternatives to this proposal. Proposal 1, you let a computer do it, and you base it on proportional democracy. And the proportional democracy you can prove mathematically is fair. The computer draws the lines, it's random. I do allow about 1% shifting to put communities of interest together so we have less squiggly lines. But then it would be, with a 55% Democratic Commonwealth, between 54 and 56 on average. So that's my bill. That's my best bill. That's the computer bill. That's the one I want to pass. If it doesn't pass, though, I'm putting forward a second proposal. And my second proposal maps the constitutional amendment perfectly, word for word. What's the only change? I take out the Supreme Court of Virginia. Because if they love this commission, they can have their commission. But if the commission doesn't agree, it'll go to the General Assembly, not the Virginia Supreme Court. Now, they argued that you can have more representation if we have their constitutional amendment. See, I don't think so. I agree that gerrymandering harms representation, absolutely. But again, I think this constitutional amendment increases gerrymandering, so it lessens representation. Indeed, my proportional thing, that would solve it all. Okay, what else? They said that they need demographic diversity and geographic diversity. Well, sure, we're going to have geographic diversity. There's 100 districts for delegates, and we're going to have. I support demographic diversity. I support enabling amendment for that. But the most important thing is neither. The most important thing is political diversity. We must have a state that matches the people. That's what democracy is all about. That's why gerrymandering is wrong. It's not the funky shapes, people. It's the fact that everyone is represented. Again, they mentioned California and Michigan. And I point out those Supreme Courts are not chosen by the legislatures. 48 states don't have the legislatures choose the Supreme Court, only Virginia and South Carolina. They talked about fair maps. They talked about the fact that we redistrict every 10 years, except in Texas. That's a reminder that back in 2004, Texas, broke the 1 in 10 year rule to gerrymander Texas. But again, that makes my point. That's people being bad actors. That's exactly what I fear. That's why I want to get all the people out of it and let the computers do it. Let's see. They talked about some people are only in it for themselves. Some politicians are only in it for themselves. Well, that's true. There's no question that's true. But newsflash, some judges are only in it for themselves. Remember Justice Scalia? Remember Justice Scalia, who supposedly believed in states' rights but didn't let Florida count its votes and didn't let Massachusetts choose who could get married? I mean, we see Justice Scalia, who claimed to be a strict constructionist and then basically made up the law as he went along. Judges aren't perfect. Before 2000, before Bush v. Gore, I did have some faith in judges. It went out the window in 2000. Judges, unfortunately, are often just as political as politicians. And all you have to do is look at the Virginia Supreme Court. Who's on it? The most recent justice we picked was the only choice the Republicans let us have, the sister of a sitting Republican senator. And who was chosen before that? The right-hand man of Ken Cuccinelli. All 7 justices of the Supreme Court were chosen by a majority Republican House of Delegates. I was talking with a constituent today. He pointed out, true, that only a majority of the justices were chosen by a Republican Senate and a Republican House. So 4 were chosen by Republican Senate, Republican House. 3 were chosen by a Republican House and a Democratic Senate. It didn't give me much comfort, particularly when one of the judges chosen by a Republican House and Democratic Senate was a former Republican senator and delegate. That's Justice Mims. So I'm worried about this court. All right, what else? Someone mentioned that they thought that no one ever challenged John Warner for a while. Silly argument. John Warner was elected statewide, got nothing to do with gerrymandering. And it bothered me that the League of Women Voters, which claims to be nonpartisan, would support this eminently Republican proposal, a proposal that helps Republicans. Look, League of Women Voters, One Virginia 2021, do you want to get rid of gerrymandering in a fair way? I mean, there are people that argue that actually Democrats, we could gerrymander Virginia. After all, look at the top 10 gerrymander states in the nation. One of them, Maryland, is gerrymandered in favor of Democrats. Maryland mixed its maps and got one more congressional seat solely out of gerrymander. Point conceded. But 9 of the 10 most gerrymandered states in the United States, 9 of them are by Republicans. And they weren't getting one seat in Florida and Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Indiana, Wisconsin, and the other states that you could read in my primer on gerrymandering. They were getting dozens of seats. So the Republicans have gerrymandered 30, 40 seats in their direction. We Democrats gerrymandered 1. Shame on us. If you want to stop gerrymandering, League of Women Voters, 1 Virginia 2021, here's my proposal. Don't do a Virginia constitutional amendment. Do a national constitutional amendment. Overturn the United States Supreme Court decision that said that political gerrymandering is A-OK. Let's see if the Republicans who support this proposal would support a U.S. constitutional amendment, that says no more gerrymandering. Everything has to be proportional. Look at the most recent state election, have computers do it. You can deviate 1%. That's it. Come on, League of Women Voters. Where is your nonpartisan U.S. constitutional amendment, which would, frankly, by making the system fair, dramatically harm Republican gerrymandering just because it's so more pervasive than Democratic gerrymandering? Okay, just a few more things, and then I promise you I'm done. I'm just responding to the arguments I heard. They pointed out that politicians don't follow what the voters say, they follow what their donors say. Well, that's true for some of them. Throw those bums out. Primary them if they're in your party. Challenge them if they're in the other party. But that's not an argument for this constitutional amendment. That's an argument about why you don't like your particular politician. Look, I admit that my district that I proudly represent, Alexandria, Arlington, and Fairfax, the Fighting 45th, we are overwhelmingly blue. Point conceded. I do not fear Republicans challenging me. Frankly, I'd welcome it because I like a debate, if you figured that out. But Democrats can challenge me. I had a Democratic primary challenger in 2017. She decided to drop out because frankly, I think I serve my constituents pretty well. I think they're pretty happy with me. I think I am transparent and I am approachable. But people can run against me. It's their every right to run against me. In fact, I had a constituent so angry at me today that who knows, someone may run against me because of this stance I'm taking, which, let's face it, I am not taking the politically wise stance. If I had a bunch of campaign managers, and I don't, they'd say, Mark, go with the flow, follow the sheep. This amendment's likely to pass. You better stand with them. It looks bad. It looks like you favor gerrymandering. Well, look like it or not, I have to do what I think is right. And I really fear this amendment. There are better ways. And my better ways, again, are a computer or this amendment without the Supreme Court. All right, I'm almost done here. What else? I'm reading this. The other thing they said, which I thought was hilarious, was a bunch of them would talk about bad Republican ideas. They don't like that that people have to get a job to get Medicaid expansion, or that poor people are mistreated, right? They don't like the policies of the Republican majority, which exist, truthfully, because of the Republican gerrymander. That's true. But the way out of that is to elect a Democratic majority. It's got nothing to do with this proposal. In fact, if you really want progressive ideals, you actually want a Democratic gerrymander. So that argument doesn't work at all. The other thing is they really think that people should represent a place. So I should only represent Alexandria. And that'd be easier for me. It'd be easier for me. I wouldn't go to all those functions in Arlington and Fairfax. But I think when you represent a little bit more, you get a better feel for how other people around you are living. And at the end of the day, as I talked about, if you pack the Democrats too tightly, that harms us. I think that's about it. The last thing I would say is that I had disagreement with a constituent. I won't say his name, obviously, and I was sorry because obviously I try to represent my constituents as best I can. And he was saying, look, Mark, if we get it wrong, we'll just change it in 2031. I pointed out how that can't happen. And he said, look, this is the only train leaving the station. Those aren't the words he used, but basically, this is our one chance to change it. Now, I concede this is the one chance to get a constitutional amendment prior to 2021. But we don't need a constitutional amendment prior to 2021. We can do it in a regular bill in 2020. My two regular bills would solve the problem for 2021. And then we could have a really good constitutional amendment. Again, I prefer the computer model because it's fair, and we could get that done in time for 2031. So what's the problem? It's not the only train leaving the station. And finally, I should end with this. Perhaps the thing that most concerned me, and I got to tell you something, I've convinced a lot of people, but the two people who've really been angry at me, my constituents who have been really angry at me, basically challenge my motivation. They don't challenge the facts. They don't challenge the point that just two legislators, Kirk Cox and Todd Gilbert, can kill the whole commission. And they don't challenge the fact that the Supreme Court would then decide, the Virginia Supreme Court. And they don't challenge the fact that the Virginia Supreme Court is a very conservative court. And they don't challenge the fact that it was appointed by conservatives in the House. They don't challenge my facts. They can't. They challenge my motivations. They challenge me. Mark, we just don't believe that you're doing this for good government. We believe you're doing this because you want Democrats to remain in power forever. Now, I concede that I like the Democratic majority. I fought very hard for this Democratic majority. I support progressive values. Everyone who knows me knows that. That's true. But I don't think we need to cheat to win. And I don't think we should. I think proportional representation is fair. I would like to see proportional representation in our Virginia Constitution. Put that in here. Proportional representation. Don't put this Virginia Supreme Court decides nonsense. Put proportional representation. Proportional. And I would base it on the most recent gubernatorial election, which is a statewide election. And you do have to look at the politics. This idea that if we don't look at the politics, everything will work out, that's a lie. If you don't look at the politics and you draw boxes, what happens? Democrats are all packed into solid blue Northern Virginia, and we get unfair maps. No, you have to look at how people voted to make the districts fair. So let's put proportional representation in the Virginia Constitution. We could do it by a law this year, and we could do it by a constitutional amendment in 22 and 23. So thanks for listening to my little rant here. I just had to get it off my chest. And Facebook Live is sort of a great way to do that. You should know, if you don't, that I'll be debating Brian Canyon, the leader of One Virginia 2021, in a spirited debate before the Arlington 100. It's going to be at Phelan Hall at Marymount University. That's this Wednesday, December 11th. 7 p.m. is when you get the meal that you can pay for in advance. That it starts promptly at 8. You might want to RSVP. You don't have to RSVP, but you might want to just so they know how many people are coming. I think we're going to have a big crowd. I think people are starting to understand this issue, and for once it will be a fair debate. Now, I walked into an unfair debate. It was like when I walk into Fox News. Everyone disagreed with me. That's why I'm presenting my side here. But the best way to understand an issue is to hear both sides. And I want you to hear Brian Cannon's side. And I think you'll see that this is an idea that's a mistake. It's an idea because good people fought so hard against Republican gerrymandering, and they saw how terrible it was, and it was unfair, and they fought against it, and now they feel like we can't turn around and do it a better way. We have to take this particular amendment that the Republicans wrote in 20 minutes. Remember, they threw away One Virginia 21's original amendment. They threw away George Barker, Dick Sassaw's original amendment. They threw out the governor. They put it in the Virginia Supreme Court. We had 20 minutes to vote on it, and I voted for it, along with most of my colleagues. The whole Senate voted for it, because I hoped we could find some kind of enabling legislation to tie the Virginia Supreme Court down. And if this amendment passes, I'll just do my damnedest to put in really good enabling legislation. But I fear that's not enough. if we can't stop the Virginia Supreme Court from going off the rails, they can control Virginia's future forever. And just like Bush v. Gore, I don't think the Supreme Court should choose who our elected leaders are. I think the people should. And that's why my proportional representation, I think, is the best one. I'm now going to read your comments, which I haven't read because I've been looking in the camera. But I thank you for listening to me. And if you enjoyed this, feel free to share it. Maybe I'll do more Facebook Live videos when I'm incensed about something that I've just gone through. Thank you for your time, everybody. Good night.